Now, the new way to say, I disagree with the administration's policies. It appears to be to call for impeachment. This official should be impeached. That official should be impeached because I don't like the way they're doing or not doing their jobs. It's no longer the case that impeachment just addresses high crimes or misdemeanors or personal wrongdoing. It's they aren't doing the job I want them to do, so they should be impeached and removed from office. House Republicans, mostly members of the right-wing Freedom Caucus, have introduced 14 impeachment resolutions since January 2021. Biden has been the target of 9, with many on the far right making it a consistent talking point.
He's planning on selling more oil out of our strategic petroleum reserves, again, starting in October. So I'm introducing articles of impeachment against Joe Biden on Monday.
There are potentially multiple grounds to consider for impeachment. Probably the most compelling is the utter lawlessness of President Biden's refusal to enforce the border.
And he's not helping himself with letting Russians negotiate the JCPOA with the Iranians. So the question is why? And, you know, if this isn't a case for really taking seriously impeaching Biden, I don't know what is.
Really? But it's not just Biden. 2 resolutions have been aimed at Attorney General Merrick Garland, 1 each against Vice President Kamala Harris, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas. Last week, Ohio Congressman and ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee Jim Jordan made the case for impeaching the Department of Homeland Security Secretary, citing purely political differences. He said, quote, Mayorkas deserves it. He's told us how many times the border's secure, and you almost want to say, like, what are you talking about? There's not a rational person with an ounce of sense who thinks the border's secure. Now, you can agree with every word of what Jordan said, and that doesn't mean that Mayorkas should be impeached. And yet Arizona Congressman Andy Biggs put forward legislation to impeach Secretary Mayorkas. It's garnered 31 co-sponsors. In the history of this nation, only 1 cabinet member has ever been impeached by Congress, and that was William Belknap, Secretary of War under Ulysses Grant, who was impeached unanimously by the House of Representatives for taking bribes in exchange for profitable contracts. Not because he was bad at his job, but because he was using his position for personal gain. There have been a lot of really bad cabinet members, none of whom were impeached just for being bad at their jobs. And yet a new article from the right-wing publication The Federalist argues the first thing Republicans should do when they take back Congress is impeach Merrick Garland. The piece says, in part, tax cuts for domestic manufacturers or whatever out-of-touch boilerplate things GOP leaders imagine their priority should be once they regain Congress can wait. The urgent thing now is to impeach and remove Garland before he causes irreparable harm to the Republic. Basically saying, ignore any legislative policies. Let's just get right to impeachment. And that sort of talk from the media puts pressures on members of Congress, like Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz, who made the same argument in an interview with Real American Voices.
If we don't engage in impeachment inquiries to get the documents and the testimony and the information we need, then I believe that our voters will feel betrayed, and that likely that could be the biggest win the Democrats could hope for in 2024. We can do that without the Senate and without the White House, and that's why it should be investigations first, policy, bill making to support the lobbyists and the PACs as a far diminished priority.
Yeah, policies and bill making. What do we care about that stuff? Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene filed articles of impeachment against President Biden. She actually wants it to apply retroactively, claiming abuse of his power during his time as vice president years ago. Greene alone has introduced 5 resolutions. Now, after the botched Afghanistan withdrawal, Colorado Congresswoman Lauren Boebert put forward legislation to have Vice President Kamala Harris removed from office for refusing to invoke the 25th Amendment against Biden.
But the solution that I have put forward, the paperwork's already been filed. I have introduced articles of impeachment to impeach Joe Biden, impeach Kamala Harris.
Look, I was very critical of the Afghanistan withdrawal. But this is just wasteful gamesmanship. Maryland Congressman Andy Harris and South Carolina Congressman Ralph Norman filed articles of impeachment against Secretary Blinken.
Secretary Blinken has utterly failed in his duties as Secretary of State, as defined by the roles and duties of the position in statute. They're clearly written in Title 22 of the U.S. Code. For instance, the Secretary of State shall develop and implement policies and programs to provide for the security of the United States government operations of a diplomatic nature. Clearly wasn't done in Afghanistan, as we have abandoned our embassy.
To be clear, it's not just far-right Republicans who engage in this sort of foolishness. Back in 2019, Congressman Eric Swalwell, Democrat, told CNN this about William Barr and Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin.
I believe we should first impeach the Attorney General and the Secretary of the Treasury, SC. I think they are front door obstructors. The evidence that you would need for an impeachment with Donald Trump, they've buried deep beneath the earth and have obstructed. They've violated the law. They're worthy of impeachment.
And the NAACP even made the case in 2020 for the impeachment of then Attorney General Bill Barr. But here's the difference. The Democrats' efforts to impeach cabinet members were far more fringe than what we're seeing from the far right of the Republican Party, where so many are now demanding impeachment of every major official with whom they disagree. Joining me now is Michael Gerhardt, a professor at the University of North Carolina School of Law, who has actually been a witness in both the Clinton and Trump impeachment proceedings. Professor, thanks very much for coming on the program. Appreciate it. Have you ever seen this much talk about impeaching cabinet members?
You'd have to go back a long ways to find anything remotely like this, but there's never been this much talk about impeaching cabinet members. We've had people threaten to impeach all presidents all throughout our history. But as your own clips just demonstrated, the talk about impeachment is substituting for the lack of talk about policies. Apparently, these same congressmen, for example, Representative Gates, have no interest in policy. So they're using impeachment to get attention for themselves and to throw red meat to their supporters.
Now, there is no doubt that some are going to ask about Democrats impeaching Donald Trump twice. And look, from my perspective, whether you agree or disagree with the impeachment efforts against Donald Trump, it was at least based on specific accusations that he was trying to use his position improperly for personal benefit, that he tried to pressure Zelensky to investigate his political opponent, Joe Biden, and that his actions leading up to January 6th were an effort to improperly try to regain power. Whether you think he should or should not have been impeached, and again, that is not what I'm saying here. They were both about personal benefit, which it does seem to me has typically been a critical factor in impeachment.
That makes sense, what you just said. And typically, impeachment is about abuse of power. It's about corruption, if we have to think of one word. It's not about policy. And everything I've just heard on your show so far, everything I've read in the newspapers, coming from people threatening impeachment, is about policy differences. That's why we have elections. For example, Senator Cruz and Senator Graham talk about the fact that the current secretaries withdrew or didn't follow President Trump's policies. Well, Congress makes policy, and President Trump issued executive orders, which after an election, President Biden withdrew. That's how elections work. They have consequences. And if people have problems with how these cabinet secretaries are performing, they're actually following the orders of their president. And so elections will determine who's the next president. Impeachment doesn't do that. Impeachment is just a sideshow right now for these members of Congress.
And it sounds to me, though, like we are going to end up wasting a lot of time if and when Republicans take over the House. I'm not saying that they're going to necessarily get the votes to impeach, but it's going to be a huge issue. When you hear folks like Gates and others saying, let's not even focus on bill making. Let's not focus on policy. Let's focus on impeachment. That at the very least, it's going to be a major discussion point.
I think that's right. It'll be a discussion point, first and foremost, within the Republican caucus. It may be made a discussion point on the different committees in Congress. But the critical thing is that that discussion is substituting for policy.
Yep.
It's substituting for the policy work of Congress. And I don't think most Americans across the country want Congress only to think about impeachment.
Yeah.
They want Congress to solve problems, policy problems. Again, that's what elections are for. And it just is a reminder how important the right to vote is. If people support these threats, you can vote that way. If you don't support them, vote a different way.
Yeah, except I would hope that even people who are voting overwhelmingly for Republicans would say, you know what, I don't want this stuff of cabinet member impeachments to be the focus. I want to try to get legislation done that I believe in, right? Stuff that I support, et cetera. Professor Gerhardt, thanks a lot for coming on the program. Really appreciate it.
I appreciate it too. Thanks.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your cable provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.